Several different trends gripped the AAA market in the last decade. Many of these tendencies will not only disappear over time, but also increase their insistence on them. Many of them are harmless, too, like the loss of monopoly on many games or their consecutive delays. However, some not only tap into the gamer's experience, but also have a negative impact on the entire medium of the game. These trends can be the supply of AAA games in very bad technical conditions, the uniformity of all the big games in terms of mechanics and tone, and not so fair monetization practices. Unfortunately, there are many of these trends. For example, the number of intergenerational games has increased sharply in recent years. Today, games are released with less content than old games, rather than more content. Publishers prefer to follow their old and famous IPs instead of investing in new IPs. Even new IPs are usually a new veneer for a popular style or trend. Of course, as gamers we would like to see these trends removed from the video game industry, especially AAA games. However, one issue should not be forgotten, is the request of a certain segment of gamers to achieve the best and most advanced technology in video games and create the most realistic worlds and stories that have created the present situation. You may not like to hear that, but the truth is that applying for the best graphics in video games leads to a number of problems. These problems manifest themselves in 3 different types. 1. More funding is needed to develop video games. 2. More time is needed to develop video games. 3. More advanced operations must be managed. Each of these 3 factors in particular leads to many problems and bad trends in video games. So let's check them one by one. Requiring more money to develop video games has several effects. The budget for games increases so much that the publisher prefers not to take risks. This means publishers prefer not to invest much of their money in unapproved and new ideas, because they need to be somewhat sure of the return on investment. That's why most publishers today prefer to invest in sequels, old franchises and renovations. This is not exclusive to third-party publishers such as Electronic Arts and Ubisoft. Even the PlayStation recently decided to expand its large franchises to several different outlets. The Last of Us series or Ghost of Tsushima movie is an example. But the shortage of new IPs is just one of the disadvantages of increasing funding. The truth is that even when a new IP is released, we're merely dealing with a new veneer for an old game. This is important in its worst way, seen in the Ubisoft games. Confidence in old and popular genres, repetitive mechanics and the style of games with the lowest possible risks have all led us to face very uniform games in this publisher. Ubisoft is also not the only publisher suffering from this monotony. There is no doubt that Sony's exclusive games today have much less variety than in the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 or even PlayStation Vita eras. Those consoles had games like Ape Escape alongside God of War, Gravity Rush and Killzone. Recently, most of Sony's exclusive games focus on a particular style of cinematic narrative in the action-adventure genre. The number of strange and unique games in their collection has decreased somewhat, due to the increased cost of developing video games. Unfortunately, the uniformity of the games is only part of the consequences of increasing the budget. The biggest problem, which most people agree with being annoying, is the harmful ways to make money through in-app payments. Pre-purchase benefits, expensive special editions, extension packages, loot boxes, season pass and battle pass are part of the publisher's new ways to make extra money. The current situation is in a way that may not merely compensate for the sale of games. For this reason, publishers compensate for this dispute. Moving towards more budgets has had other consequences both for video games, both as a medium and as an industry. Of course, to be fair, we have to say that many of these consequences are positive. For example, reducing the number of exclusive games is one of these positive results. It's not so rational to limit audiences financially, given the huge cost of making a game. Even Sony and Microsoft offer their own exclusive games for the PC platform. Also, one of the reasons for the intergenerational games is the same increase in funding. Limiting a gamer to a system that sold only 25 million devices is not commercially recommended. Sony launches games such as Spider-Man Miles Morales and God of War Ragnarok on a mid-generational basis. Clearly, many of these negative factors would not have been seen in the video game industry if the budget for making games was lower. At the very least, it can be guaranteed that their intensity would not have been this high. There are already many examples to support this claim. Just take a look at the market for standalone games, Japanese games and Nintendo games. These are the markets where innovative titles like Persona 5 and Hollow Knight are found. These games do not try to provide the most realistic visual effects. For this reason, their creativity is not limited. I think this needs to be explained a little. Now creators need more time to produce content than ever before, as modern technology is more sophisticated. In simple terms, it can be said that making a great world in Final Fantasy VII is much easier than Final Fantasy VII Remake. Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate with more than 100 monsters is easier than developing 50 monsters for Monster Hunter World. Designing diverse and extensive missions at Morrowind is easier than doing something similar on Skyrim. Unlike Infinite, Halo 3 was able to come with the fictional, co-op, multiplayer and Forge sections. This is inevitable, as more development resources to build content with the expected graphical level should be made available to the manufacturer today. In other words, building a single environment in the current situation takes more time, effort and money than designing several environments during the PlayStation 2 era. So, naturally, the content in the games decreases when it comes to supply. Unless you are Rockstar Games, and you were given 10 years to develop a game. In other words, the prolongation of development cycles is also under the question. You can't develop a modern-day AAA game in a shorter time. If you remember, Naughty Dog developed and released 3 Uncharted and The Last of Us games during the PlayStation 3 era. But on the PlayStation 4 the studio developed only 1 full Uncharted game and 1 The Last of Us. Bethesda released 3 major open-world games on the Xbox 360. But on Xbox One we only saw the release of Fallout 4 and Fallout 76. On the Xbox 360 we saw the release of 4 Halo games, but Xbox One only hosted a new Halo game. In the following 2 points, it should be noted that this important issue also leads to the supply of games with bugs and many technical defects. In the 8th generation, we saw the release of titles such as Cyberpunk 2077, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Fallout 76 and Sea of Thieves, which were technically a disaster when it came to release. The more time you spend developing a game, the higher the cost of developing it. It will eventually reach a point where merely supplying games with bad conditions is more commercially rational. Again, as in the previous case, there are good examples to support these claims. It is very difficult to see little or too much bugs in the Japanese and independent gaming market. Games like Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Hollow Knight come from the very beginning with a high volume of content. We are also witnessing their release with good technical quality. Because these games are not looking for the best and most advanced technology in game development. Due to the high number of sections and areas of the development process of a game, the probability of errors in the construction of games has increased significantly compared to the past. Working a lot of elements together means you have to accept that mistakes are much more likely. In combination with 2 other points, studios now have even less time to fix these errors. Due to the conditions in which the developers are located, it is natural to choose them to supply games with technical defects and then fix those problems with multiple updates. However, this means offering more games in disappointing technical conditions. My final word is that the current demands of gamers for AAA games cannot be achieved with the most advanced game development technology and the highest possible visual level in the long run. Finally, the day will come when this process must stop. A trend that is undoubtedly extremely harmful to the industry and the art of video games. In the 8th generation, many studios were forced to declare bankruptcy and closure. The development of the sequel was also cancelled for many famous and old franchisees, since these franchises did not sell enough to justify their own existence. Games on the 8th and even 7th generations are visually beautiful. The critical and comprehensive need to raise technology levels and costs is not at the beginning of a new generation. Games can also be great without providing the best possible visual effects.